The dirt under her fingernails had turned black 3 days ago, and no amount of scrubbing in the icy creek behind the warden's compound could get it out. Seraphina pressed her hands flat against the frozen ground, her knees sinking into mud that smelled of iron and rotting pine needles, and dug. The hole was already 18 inches deep. Her fingers were bleeding where the nails had cracked against buried stones, and the cold had numbed everything below her wrists, which she supposed was a mercy. She could feel the 2 fangs loosening in her upper jaw, that terrible ache that meant the shift was trying to come the wolf inside her, clawing at the walls of its cage. She would not let it out. She hadn't let it out in 9 years, and she would die in this frozen field before she broke that promise. The warden's compound sat on the northern edge of the Greymoor territory, a cluster of concrete buildings that had once been a military outpost and now served as a containment facility for wolves the pack deemed defective. Seraphina was not a prisoner technically. She was a records clerk. She catalogued the names and dates and infractions of every wolf who passed through the warden's iron gates, typing them into a database so old that the keyboard had worn smooth where the most common letters were. She had been doing this since she was 16, when the Greymoor Alpha had looked at her file, looked at the gap where her wolf should have manifested, and assigned her to the only place where a wolfless Omega was considered useful. Except she was not wolfless. She had never told anyone that. Not the warden, who was a thick-necked beta named Corvin, with tobacco-stained fingers and a voice like gravel in a blender. Not Dr. Liesel, the facility physician, who checked her vitals once a month and always noted, in the same bored handwriting, "No wolf detected. Recommend continued placement." Not the other clerks, 2 older women named Marta and June, who shared a thermos of black coffee every morning and spoke to Seraphina only when they needed her to reach files on the high shelf because she was the tallest. She had not even told her wolf. That was the strangest part. Somewhere inside her, curled into a space so small it should not have been able to contain anything alive, her wolf existed. She could feel it the way you feel a word on the tip of your tongue, present and unreachable. She had spent 9 years starving it, refusing the shift, learning to clamp down on every instinct, every flicker of heat behind her sternum, every time the moon pulled at something deep in her marrow and whispered, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." Tonight was the last night she would have to fight it. She pulled a leather pouch from inside her coat. The coat was too thin for December, a men's canvas jacket she had found in the donation bin outside the compound's laundry, and it smelled of motor oil and someone else's sweat. Inside the pouch were her fangs. Not her current teeth, the human ones that sat in her jaw like any other person's canines. These were different. She had pulled them herself 3 years ago, using a pair of veterinary pliers she had stolen from the supply closet. The pain had been extraordinary. She had stuffed a washcloth in her mouth and bitten down until the cotton was pink, then red, then a deep arterial crimson, and she had twisted until the roots came free with a sound like pulling a nail from wet wood. Wolf fangs were not like human teeth. They grew back. That was the problem. Every 3 years, give or take, the shift tried to reassert itself, and the fangs would begin to descend again, pressing against the empty sockets where she had torn the old ones out. She could feel them now, 2 hard points of pressure just above her gum line, insistent as a heartbeat. Silver soil would stop them. She had read about it in one of the old case files, a wolf from the 1800s who had buried extracted teeth in silver-laced earth, and the regrowth had simply stopped. The silver bonded with the root nerve cauterized the connection between the wolf and its physical anchors. It was effectively a permanent defanging, a self-performed lobotomy of the shift. Seraphina opened the pouch and looked at the 2 fangs resting in her palm. They were longer than she remembered, curved, slightly yellowed at the base where the root had dried. She wrapped them in a strip of cloth she had soaked in colloidal silver, the kind Dr. Liesel kept in the infirmary for wound care. Then she placed them in the hole, nestled them into the dark earth like seeds, and began pushing the dirt back over them. Her hands shook, not from the cold. This was the right thing to do. She knew it was the right thing. A wolf she could not control, a shift she could not safely execute fangs that grew back, no matter how many times she ripped them out. She was a danger to herself and everyone in the compound. Corvin had once told her in a rare moment of what passed for kindness in his vocabulary that she was the quietest person he had ever met, and that was a compliment in a place where quiet meant safe. She intended to stay safe. She intended to stay quiet. She pressed the dirt flat and sat back on her heels. The wind cut across the field, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the compound's generator building and the faint chemical tang of the silver settling into the soil. It was done. She wiped her bleeding hands on her jeans and stood up, knees popping, and that was when the headlights appeared on the road. Not just headlights. A convoy. 4 black SUVs moving in formation, the kind with tinted windows and reinforced frames that belonged to wolves who did not need to explain themselves to anyone. The lead vehicle had a pennant on the antenna, barely visible in the dark, but she recognized the symbol even at this distance because she had catalogued it 1,000 times in the old records. A silver crown above crossed claws, the crest of the Blood Crown Pack, the Alpha King's pack. Seraphina's breath stopped in her chest. She dropped to a crouch behind the low stone wall that bordered the field, pressing her body against the frozen rock, and watched the convoy turn onto the compound's access road. The gates were opening. Corvin must have been expecting them, which meant he had known, and had not told anyone, which was unusual, because Corvin told everyone everything, mostly because he enjoyed the sound of his own voice. She should go inside. She should go to her desk in the records room and pretend she had been there all evening, typing names into the database, drinking the lukewarm tea she always kept in the thermos her mother had given her before the accident, the thermos with the chipped lid that she held together with electrical tape. She should not be outside in a frozen field at 11 at night, with dirt on her face and blood on her hands, and 2 wolf fangs buried in silver soil 6 feet from where she was hiding. She ran, not toward the compound. That was the problem. The convoy had already passed the gate and was pulling into the main courtyard, which was between her and the records building. She would have to circle around the back through the generator yard, past the infirmary, and in through the service entrance. She was halfway across the field when her boot caught on a buried root, and she went down hard, the impact knocking the air out of her lungs, her chin striking the frozen ground with a crack that filled her skull with white light and the taste of copper. She lay there for a moment, stunned. The sky above her was cloudless, thick with stars, and the moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to cast shadows. She could hear the convoy's engines idling, doors opening, boots on gravel. Voices. One of them was Corvin's, pitched higher than usual, the tone he used when he was nervous, which was almost never. The other voice was low. Not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the way thunder carries, not because of volume, but because of weight, because the air itself seemed to rearrange around it, making space. Seraphina had never heard anything like it. It was the kind of voice that made you go still, the way prey goes still, except that the stillness in her body was not fear. It was recognition. Something inside her chest cracked open. Not her ribs, though. For a moment she thought the fall had broken something, because the sensation was that violent, that physical. A fissure running through the center of her sternum, spreading outward like fractures in ice, and through the cracks poured heat. Not warmth, heat. The kind that comes before a wildfire, the air shimmering the ground, baking everything too bright, and too much, and too close. Her wolf woke up. After 9 years of silence, 9 years of starvation, 9 years of Seraphina clamping every door and window and airlock shut, her wolf simply opened its eyes and looked out through hers. And what it saw, what Seraphina saw, lying flat on her stomach, in a frozen field with blood on her chin and dirt caked under her broken fingernails, was a man standing in the compound courtyard, 60 yards away. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not tall the way Corvin was tall, thick and wide, built for endurance. This man was tall the way old-growth trees are tall, the kind of height that makes everything around it look like it was built to a different scale. His shoulders were broad under a black coat that reached his knees, and his hair was dark, almost black, pushed back from a face that was all hard angles and shadow. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pale against skin that was a deep, sun-weathered brown. His eyes, even at this distance, even in the dark, caught the moonlight and threw it back, amber. Kyle Voss, the Alpha King. She had seen his photograph in the records exactly once, a formal portrait from his coronation 7 years ago. The photograph had not prepared her for the reality of him, the way his presence bent the space around it, the way her lungs forgot how breathing worked. Mate. The word detonated in her skull like a grenade. Her wolf, her starved and caged and forgotten. Wolf howled it so loudly that Seraphina clapped her hands over her ears before she remembered that the sound was internal, that no one else could hear it, that she was losing her mind in a frozen field, while the most powerful wolf on the continent stood 60 yards away and had absolutely no reason to look in her direction. He looked in her direction. His head turned. Not casually, not like someone scanning a perimeter. Sharply, precisely, the way a predator locks onto movement. His amber eyes found the exact patch of darkness where she was lying, and even across the distance, even through the dark, she felt the weight of that gaze land on her like a hand pressing against her chest. She stopped breathing. He said something to Corvin without looking away from her. She could not hear the words, but she saw Corvin's face change, saw the warden's expression shift from nervous deference to outright alarm. Then the Alpha King walked away from the convoy, away from his guards, away from the lit courtyard, and stepped into the dark field. Toward her. Seraphina scrambled to her feet. Every instinct she had, human and wolf alike, screamed in 2 different directions. Run, said the human part, the part that had spent 9 years being invisible, being quiet, being the kind of person who reached for files on the high shelf and was otherwise unnoticed. Run, because a man like that didn't walk toward a woman like her unless something was very wrong. Stay, said her wolf. Stay, 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 stay. She ran. She made it 12 steps before the smell hit her. Not the wood smoke, not the silver, not the iron and pine that had been her world for the past hour. This was different. Cedar and black pepper, and something underneath both of those, something animal and electric like the air before a lightning strike, like the space between a match being struck and the flame catching. It wrapped around her and stopped her feet as effectively as a wall. She stood in the middle of the field, her back to him, her hands clenched at her sides, and she could hear his footsteps now, steady and unhurried, the crunch of frozen grass under boots that were not made for walking through muddy fields. He was taking his time. He knew she was not going anywhere. He stopped 10 feet behind her, The silence between them was not empty. It was pressurized, dense, with something she did not have a name for, something that made her skin prickle and her breath come shallow and her wolf press against the inside of her ribs with a desperation that bordered on pain. His voice, when it came, was quieter than she expected. Not soft. Quiet. The difference being that softness implies gentleness, and there was nothing gentle about the controlled precision of his tone. It was the voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that he never needed to raise it. Turn around. She did not turn around. The silence stretched. She could hear his breathing, slow and even, and beneath it, impossibly, she could hear his heartbeat. Not with her ears. With something deeper. Something in her bones, in the marrow, in the place where her wolf was pressing its face against the bars of its cage and whimpering. "I can smell your blood," he said. "You are injured. Turn around." "My chin," she said, and her voice came out rusty like a hinge that had not been used. "I fell." A pause. Then closer. He had moved without her hearing it, which should not have been possible on frozen ground. "That is not the only blood I smell." Her hands. She looked down at them, at the torn nails and the crusted red lines where the stones had scraped skin from fingertips. She curled them into fists and tucked them against her stomach. "Turn around," he said for the third time. And this time there was something beneath the control. Something that vibrated at a frequency she felt in her teeth. It was not a request. It was not a command. It was something older than either of those things. Something that lived in the space between an alpha and his mate, and her body responded before her mind could object. She turned. He was closer than 10 feet now. 6, maybe. Close enough that the moonlight showed her the details the photograph had missed. The scar was not a single line, but a network branching where it crossed his cheekbone, the kind of scar that came from claws, not blades. His eyes were not just amber, but layered gold at the outer ring, darkening to almost copper near the pupil, and they were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, and also made looking away feel physically impossible. He was looking at the blood on her chin, at the dirt on her coat, at the way she was holding her hands against her body, hiding them. His nostrils flared, and she watched his expression change. Not dramatically. Not the way faces change in stories where emotions play across features like weather. This was subtle. A tightening at the corners of his mouth, a shift in the muscles of his jaw, the amber of his eyes brightening by a single degree, as if someone had turned up a dimmer switch inside his skull. "Who did this to you?" he said. "Nobody. I fell. I was in the field and I fell." He studied her for a long moment. Then he looked past her, over her shoulder at the field behind her, at the disturbed earth, at the hole she had not quite finished filling in. "What were you burying?" It was not a question. She opened her mouth to lie, to say rocks, to say garbage, to say anything that would make a man like this lose interest in a woman like her, and walk back to his convoy and drive away and leave her alone in her quiet, invisible, safe life. Her wolf wouldn't let her speak. It rose up inside her throat and sealed her vocal cords shut, and the only sound that came out was a small, broken noise that was halfway between a breath and a sob. His eyes came back to her face. Something shifted in them. The intensity did not diminish, but it changed texture, became less predatory, and more, she thought, more like the way you look at something that hurts you, something you cannot stop looking at, even though looking at it causes pain. "You are mine," he said. The words were simple and declarative, and carried absolutely no doubt. He said them the way you would say the sky is above us, or the earth is beneath our feet. As if the alternative had never existed. Serafina's knees buckled. She did not fall. He caught her. One arm around her waist, one hand at the back of her skull, and the contact was like being struck by lightning, and also like being lowered into warm water, contradictory and simultaneous and overwhelming. His coat smelled of cedar and black pepper, and underneath that, underneath everything, the scent of his wolf, which was vast and ancient and furious and incomprehensibly gentle. She pressed her forehead against his chest and felt his heartbeat against her skin. And her wolf howled with a joy so enormous it split something open inside her that she had kept sealed for 9 years. She pushed him away. It took everything she had. Every muscle, every ounce of the discipline she had built, brick by brick, since she was 16 years old, and decided that her wolf would never see daylight again. She planted her hands against his chest and shoved, and he let her go, because an alpha king doesn't need to hold what he knows will come back, and the loss of his warmth was so sudden and so total that she gasped like she had been dropped into ice water. "No," she said. His eyebrows rose. Fractionally. "No," she said again, stronger now, though her voice was shaking, and her hands were shaking, and her wolf was throwing itself against the walls of its cage with enough force to crack bone. "You are wrong. I am not your mate. I do not have a wolf. I am a clerk. I type names into a database. I am no one." He tilted his head. The gesture was more wolf than human, the way he regarded her, patient and curious and utterly terrifyingly certain. "You are lying," he said. Not unkindly, but with the same declarative finality. "Your wolf is screaming at me right now. I can hear her from inside your skin." Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. 9 years. 9 years of silence. 9 years of every medical exam returning, no wolf detected. 9 years of building a cage so complete that not even other wolves could sense what lived inside it. And this man had heard her wolf in 60 seconds. "You cannot," she whispered. He took 1 step forward. She took 1 step back. He stopped. "What did you bury in that field?" he said again. She said nothing. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at her hands, at the blood, at the dirt packed under her ruined nails. She watched something move behind his eyes, a calculation, a deduction, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to a register that she felt in the soles of her feet. "You buried your fangs." It was not a question. She closed her eyes. In silver soil. She heard him exhale. It was the first sound he had made that was not perfectly controlled, and it contained something she had not expected from the Alpha King, from the wolf whose name was spoken in the same breath as earthquakes and bloodlines and war. It contained grief. "Why?" he said. "Because they grow back," she said, eyes still closed. "Because every 3 years they try to come back, and I pull them out again, and I am tired. Because I am not supposed to have them. Because my wolf is wrong. It has been wrong since the day I was born, and I have spent my entire life making sure no one finds out what I am, and silver soil is the only way to make it permanent. And I need it to be permanent, because I cannot keep doing this. I cannot keep pulling my own teeth out with stolen pliers in a bathroom at 3 in the morning. I cannot." She stopped. She was crying. She had not cried in years, not since the night she had pulled the fangs, the second time alone, in the infirmary bathroom, while Dr. Lysel slept in the next room, her mouth stuffed with gauze and her hands slippery with blood. The tears were hot on her frozen cheeks, and she hated them with a ferocity that surprised her. When she opened her eyes, He was kneeling. The Alpha King was kneeling in the frozen mud of a field behind a containment facility, his black coat pooling around him, his amber eyes level with hers, because she had sunk to a crouch without realizing it. He was looking at her with an expression she could not categorize, something beyond the possessiveness she had expected, beyond the anger she had feared. It was recognition. Not the mate bond, not the wolf thing, but something fundamentally human. The look of someone who has found a wound they understand, because they carry its twin. He held out his hand. "Show me where," he said. She shook her head. He did not move. His hand stayed extended, palm up, steady as stone. The cold was seeping through his coat, and his knees were in the mud, and he did not move. "I will not take your choice from you," he said, "but I need you to understand something before you make it permanent. Your wolf is not wrong. Your fangs are not wrong. Whatever they told you, whoever made you believe that what you are is something that needs to be cut out and buried, they were wrong. Not you." She stared at him. The tears had stopped, but her chest was still heaving, and her wolf was still pressing against its cage, but quieter now, listening. "You do not know me," she said. "I know your scent," he said. "I know your wolf's voice. I have been hearing it in my sleep for 7 years. I did not know what it was. I thought I was going mad. My wolf would wake me at 3 in the morning, howling at something I could not see. And now I am kneeling in mud in the middle of nowhere, and I understand. It was you, every time. It was you." She said nothing for a long time. The wind had died and the field was silent, except for their breathing, his slow, hers ragged, 2 rhythms that did not match but wanted to. She pointed at the patch of disturbed earth, 4 feet to his left. He moved without hesitation. He did not ask for a shovel. He did not take off his coat. He put his bare hands into the frozen dirt, and he dug. His fingers hit the stones she had struggled against, and he pulled them out like they were made of paper. The muscles in his forearms bunched under his sleeves, and the tendons in his hands stood out like cables, and he dug with the same relentless, patient precision he had used to walk across the field toward her, as if the cold and the dirt and the blood were irrelevant, as if the only thing that existed was the task. He found them. The cloth she had wrapped them in was already stained with silver, the colloidal solution seeping into the fibers, and when he pulled the small bundle from the earth, his hands blistered where the silver touched his skin. She watched the blisters form, in real time, watched his skin redden and bubble, and he did not flinch. He unwrapped the cloth carefully, held the 2 fangs in his scorched palm, and looked at them. Then he looked at her. "These are not Omega fangs," he said. She knew. She had always known. Omega wolves did not grow fangs that curved like that, did not have root systems that could survive being pulled twice and still regenerate. She had known since the first time she pulled them at 19, when she had measured them against the dental charts in the records room, and found that they matched nothing in the Omega or Beta columns. They matched only one classification, the column marked with a red asterisk, the column that Corvin's files labeled Rare, do not engage without alpha-level authorization. Apex Wolf, the rarest classification. Not Alpha, not Omega, not Beta. Something older. A throwback to the original bloodlines, the wolves that had existed before, packs organized into hierarchies, the wolves that did not fit into any structure because they were the structure. 1 in 10,000 births. Maybe fewer. Seraphina had spent 9 years pretending she was nothing, because the alternative was being something so anomalous. So far outside the boundaries of what a female wolf from a minor pack, with no living parents, and no status was supposed to be, that she couldn't imagine surviving the attention it would bring. She had imagined wrong. The Alpha King closed his fingers around her fangs and stood. His hands were blistered and bleeding, and he held them like they were sacred. "You are coming with me," he said. "I have a job," she said. "I have a desk. I have a thermos." He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved a fraction of an inch, and on a face as controlled as his, it was the equivalent of a laugh. "Bring the thermos," he said. She did not bring the thermos. She did not bring anything. She walked across the field beside the Alpha King with nothing but her too-thin coat and her bleeding hands, and her wolf awake, now pressing against the inside of her ribs with a warmth she had forgotten was possible. Corvin was waiting in the courtyard. His face, when he saw her walking beside Kyle Voss, went through a series of expressions so rapid they blurred together. Confusion, alarm, something that might have been understanding, and finally a careful blankness that she recognized as self-preservation. "The girl," Corvin said. "She is a records clerk." "She is my mate," Cale said, and the words dropped into the courtyard like a stone into still water. Every guard in the convoy went still. Corvin's mouth opened and then closed. The compound lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a flat institutional white that made the blood on Kyle's hands look black. "That is not possible," Corvin said. His voice had gone careful. "She has no wolf," Dr. Liesel confirmed. "Quarterly checks, 9 years of data. No shift. No manifestation. No." He stopped. Because Kyle was looking at him now, and the patience that had characterized every interaction with Serafina was absent. In its place was something that made the warden take a physical step backward, his heel catching on the concrete lip of the courtyard entrance. "You kept her here for 9 years, Kyle said. "In a containment compound, typing names into a machine. She is classified as wolfless," Corvin said. "She was assigned here by Alpha Greymore when she was 16. She is an apex wolf," Cale said. His voice had not risen. It had not needed to. "And you missed it. For 9 years. Every medical check, every evaluation, every quarterly review. Your entire facility exists to classify wolves, and you missed an apex living under your roof." Corvin's face changed again. This time the expression stuck. It was fear, genuine and unguarded, and Serafina felt something twist in her chest that was not satisfaction. It was more complicated than that. Corvin had not been kind to her, but he had not been cruel either. He had given her a desk and left her alone, which was in the economy of her life a form of mercy. "He did not know," she said, quietly. Kyle looked at her. "I hid it," she said. "I hid it well. He did not know because I made sure no one could know." Kyle studied her for a moment. Then he looked back at Corvin. "We will discuss your oversight later," he said, and the later carried the weight of a sentence. He turned to Serafina. "Get in the vehicle." She did not get in the vehicle. She stood in the courtyard, her coat too thin, her hands bloody, and she looked at the Alpha King with his blistered palms and his amber eyes and his absolute certainty, and she said the thing she had been thinking since the moment his scent had stopped her in the field. "I do not know how to be what you think I am." Something in his expression shifted. The hardness remained, but underneath it, moving like water under ice, was something she could only describe as patience. Not the performative patience of someone waiting for compliance. The real kind. The kind that comes from having waited a very long time and being willing to wait longer. "Then I will show you," he said. She got in the vehicle. The drive took 4 hours. Serafina sat in the back seat of the lead SUV, pressed against the door as far from Kyle as the confined space allowed. It was not far enough. His scent filled the vehicle like smoke, and every time the road curved and the centrifugal force shifted her weight toward him, her wolf surged forward with a hunger that made her dizzy. He did not touch her. He sat on the opposite side of the back seat, his ruined hands resting on his thighs, looking straight ahead. At some point, without speaking, he produced a first aid kit from the console between them and set it on the seat between them. An offering, not a demand. She cleaned her hands with the antiseptic wipes and bandaged her fingertips, and did not thank him, because thanking him felt like admitting something she was not ready to admit. They arrived at the Blood Crown estate at 3 a.m. It was not what she expected. She had imagined a fortress, something with walls and gates and the architectural language of power. Instead, the convoy turned down a gravel road, lined with Douglas firs, so tall their canopies blocked the sky, and emerged into a clearing where a sprawling timber frame structure sat against the base of a mountain. It looked like a lodge, an enormous, ancient, meticulously maintained lodge with warm light in the windows and wood smoke rising from 3 separate chimneys, and the kind of settled permanence that buildings have when they have been standing for a very long time and intend to keep standing. A woman was waiting on the front steps. She was in her 60s, iron-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a quilted vest over flannel, and she held a mug of something that steamed in the cold air. She watched the convoy pull up with the expression of someone who has seen Alpha Kings come and go and is not particularly impressed by any of them. Margaret Cale said, as he opened his door, "Prepare a room." The woman looked past him at Seraphina, climbing out of the back seat, dirt-streaked and hollow-eyed and shaking, and her expression did not change. "The east room," Margaret said. "It has a lock on the inside." Kyle paused. "She will want the lock," Margaret said. "Any woman arriving at 3 a.m. in that condition will want to know she can lock the door. I will bring soup." She turned and went inside. Kyle watched her go, with an expression that Seraphina was beginning to recognize as his version of fondness, which looked on his face almost exactly like annoyance. "Margaret runs the house," he said. "She has been here longer than I have. She doesn't take orders from me." "Then who does she take orders from?" "No one." "That is the arrangement." He led her inside. The lodge was warm. Not just temperature warm, though the heat from the fireplaces hit her like a wall after hours in the cold vehicle. It was warm in the way some spaces are when they have been lived in, properly, when the wood has absorbed decades of meals and conversations, and the particular frequency of a household that functions. The floors were wide plank, fur worn smooth in the pathways between rooms. The walls were hung with maps, not decorative ones, but working topographical maps with pencil annotations, and there were books everywhere on shelves stacked on tables, propping open a door. She stood in the entryway and felt absurdly like she was going to cry again. The east room was on the 2nd floor at the end of a hallway that smelled of beeswax and cedar. It had a bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a window that faced the mountain, a desk with a reading lamp, and as Margaret had promised, a lock on the inside of the door. A brass deadbolt, heavy and functional, the kind you could feel engage with a satisfying click. Seraphina locked the door. She stood with her back against it and listened to Cale's footsteps recede down the hallway, steady and unhurried, and when they faded, she slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor and pressed her hands over her face and let the shaking come. Her wolf curled around her from the inside, warm and present, and for the first time in 9 years not fighting. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke, the light through the window was golden and low late afternoon, and there was a tray outside her door with soup bread, a thermos of tea, and a note in handwriting, so precise it looked typeset. Your fangs are in the safe in my study. They are yours. You decide what happens to them. Below that, a key. Small brass for the safe, she assumed. She ate the soup standing at the window, looking out at the mountain. The soup was chicken and root vegetable, heavy on the thyme, and it was the best thing she had eaten in 9 years. Over the next 3 days, she learned the geography of the Blood Crown estate. Margaret was the axis around which the household turned. She had been the housekeeper for 40 years, through 3 generations of Voss Alphas, and she treated Kyle with the particular blend of respect and exasperation that an employee reserves for a boss they have known since he was a child who ate dirt in the garden. Margaret showed Seraphina where the kitchen was, where the library was, where the laundry machines were. She did not ask questions. She did not explain the mate bond, or Seraphina's status, or what was expected. She simply incorporated her into the rhythm of the house, the way a river incorporates a stone, naturally and without ceremony. Kyle, for his part, kept his distance. He was present at meals which Margaret served in a dining room, with a long oak table, scored with knife marks from what appeared to be centuries of use. He sat at one end. Seraphina sat at the other. He spoke when she spoke to him, and was silent when she was silent. He did not touch her. He did not crowd her. He did not make demands. It was, she thought, the strangest courtship in the history of wolves. On the 4th day she found the library. She had known it existed. Margaret had pointed to the door, but she had not gone in because she had been busy doing what she always did when placed in a new environment, which was cataloguing the exits, the schedules, the patterns, the safest places to be invisible. The library was not safe. It was a room you could get lost in, and Seraphina had spent 9 years making sure she was never lost. But on the 4th day, her wolf pressed against her ribs and said, "Go," and she went. It was 2 stories high, not a decorative library, not a room designed to impress visitors with leather spines and gilt letters. A working library. The shelves were mismatched, some built into the walls, others freestanding, arranged in no apparent order. There were books on history, botany, tactical warfare, veterinary medicine, poetry, engine, repair pack law. There was a section she found on the upper level, accessible by a spiral staircase that creaked on every other step, devoted entirely to wolf genealogy. Handwritten ledgers going back 300 years, documenting bloodlines, classifications, anomalies. She pulled a ledger from 1847 and sat cross-legged on the floor and began to read. 3 hours later, Kyle found her. He did not announce himself. She smelled him first cedar and black pepper, and then she heard the staircase creak, and then he was there, standing at the end of the row, looking at her, sitting on the floor with 4 ledgers spread around her, and dust on her bandaged fingertips. "You found the genealogy section," he said. "Your record-keeping system is a disaster," she said. His mouth twitched, that almost smile again. "Margaret has been telling me that for 20 years. She has been right for 20 years. These ledgers are not cross-referenced. The classification system changed 3 times between 1850 and 1900, and no one updated the index. You have apex wolves listed as anomalies in one volume and as a separate lineage in another. The data is here, but it is impossible to access efficiently." He leaned against the shelf and crossed his arms. The burns on his hands had healed to pink, the rapid regeneration of an alpha, but she could still see the outlines where the silver had touched him. The last person who offered to organize that collection was a historian from the university, he said. He lasted 2 weeks before Margaret found him crying in the stacks. Seraphina looked at the ledgers around her, at the handwritten entries, the faded ink, the careful documentation of wolves who had lived and died, and been categorized into neat columns that could never capture what they actually were. "I could do it," she said, "and then because old habits die hard if you need a records clerk." Something changed in his face. The almost smile disappeared, and in its place was something serious, something that made the amber of his eyes darken. "I do not need a records clerk," he said. "I need you to understand that you are not here to work for me. You are not here to be useful. You are here because you are my mate, and I have been looking for you for 7 years. And now that I have found you, I am not letting you go. But I will wait as long as you need me to wait. So if organizing these books is what you need to do while you decide whether to stay, then organize the books." He turned and went down the staircase. The creaking steps marked his descent like a metronome. She organized the books. It took 3 weeks. She built an index, cross-referenced the classification systems, created a concordance of bloodlines that spanned 3 centuries. She worked 16-hour days, not because anyone asked her to, but because the work was a language she understood, and the alternative was sitting in her locked room, trying not to think about the way Kyle's scent made her wolf press against her ribs like it was trying to escape through her skin. During those 3 weeks, things happened. She learned that the Blood Crown pack numbered 400 wolves, the largest pack in the Northern Territories. She learned that Kyle had taken the throne at 23 after his father's death in a border war, and that the scar on his face was from the wolf who had killed his father, a wolf Kyle had subsequently tracked for 6 months through winter mountain passes before finding and killing in turn. She learned these things not from Kyle, who spoke about himself the way most people speak about the weather, briefly and without interest, but from Margaret, who spoke about him the way a mother speaks about a child she has raised with pride and the permanent low-level anxiety of someone who knows exactly how much damage that child is capable of sustaining. She learned that the Blood Crown pack had enemies, a coalition of 3 smaller packs on the eastern border, led by an alpha named Darius Thane, who had been testing Kale's territory for the better part of 2 years. Thane was, according to Margaret, a man who collected grudges the way other people collected stamps meticulously and with disproportionate attachment. Kale had killed Thane's brother during the same border war that had claimed his father, and Thane had been waiting for an opportunity to return the favor. She learned, most importantly, that Kale's wolf was a problem. Not a problem in the way Corvin's files would have categorized it, not a behavioral issue or a control deficiency. A problem in the way that a contained explosion is a problem. Kale's wolf was the largest anyone in the pack had ever seen, a black-furred beast the size of a draft horse, and it was in the clinical language of wolf psychology unbonded, meaning it had been waiting for its mate, meaning it had been waiting for 9 years, 7 of which it had spent waking Kale at 3 in the morning to howl at a presence it could sense but not find, meaning it was in the carefully understated words of the pack's physician, volatile. She learned this last thing directly on a Tuesday evening in the 4th week when she came down from the library for dinner and found the dining room empty and Margaret standing at the kitchen window, watching the tree line with an expression Seraphina had not seen on her before. "Where is he?" Seraphina said. Margaret did not look away from the window. The Eastern Border Patrol reported movement. Thane's wolves, 3 incursions in the last week. Kyle went to meet them. Alone, Margaret's silence was its own answer. Seraphina stood beside her at the window. The sun was setting behind the mountain, and the tree line was a dark wall of fur and shadow, and somewhere beyond it, the Alpha King was walking into a confrontation with wolves who wanted him dead. Her wolf howled. It was not the internal muffled sound she was accustomed to. This was something else. This rattled the windows. This made the dishes in the cabinet vibrate. Margaret turned to look at her, and Seraphina saw her own reflection in the older woman's eyes, and what she saw stopped her. Her eyes were glowing. Gold. Not amber like Cale's, but pure, bright gold, the color of sunlight through honey, and they were not human eyes, not omega eyes, not even alpha eyes. They were apex eyes, and they were burning. "He will come back," Margaret said carefully. "I know," Seraphina said, and was surprised to find that she meant it, that she felt it in her marrow, with the same certainty that Cale had used when he told her she was his. She just did not know if he would come back whole. He came back at midnight. She heard the front door open from the east room, heard the heavy tread of boots on fir planks, heard Margaret's voice, low and urgent. And then she was out of bed and down the stairs before she had consciously decided to move. He was standing in the entryway. His coat was gone, and his shirt was torn, and there was blood on him. A lot of blood, most of it not his. He had a wound on his left side, 4 parallel gashes from ribs to hip claw marks deep, and he was holding his arm against them with the practiced compression of someone who has been wounded before and knows the protocol. Margaret was already there with the medical kit. She was cleaning the wound with the efficient, unsentimental movements of a woman who had been patching up Voss alphas since before Cale was born. Seraphina stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at him. He looked back. The dining room, the library, the careful distance of 4 weeks collapsed in the space between that look and her next breath. She crossed the entryway, took the gauze from Margaret's hands without asking, and pressed it against the wound on his side. The blood was warm through the fabric, and his skin was hot, fever hot, the way wolves ran after a shift, and when she pressed harder, he made a sound in his throat that was not quite a growl, and not quite a groan, and was the most human sound she had ever heard from him. "This needs stitches," she said. "Margaret can. I can," Seraphina said. "I have been stitching since I was 16. We did not always have a doctor at the compound." His amber eyes searched her face. She did not know what he found there. She only knew that he nodded once and let her take over. She stitched the wound in the kitchen under the bright overhead light with a curved needle and surgical thread from Margaret's kit. She had done this before in the infirmary at the compound, closing up wolves who had gotten into fights or hurt themselves in the yard. Her hands were steady. The stitches were small and even and precise, the kind of work that comes from years of practice, and the particular concentration of someone who has always been good with her hands, who types names into databases and pulls her own teeth with stolen pliers and cross-references 3 centuries of genealogical records. She was halfway through the last suture when she realized his wolf was purring, not literally. Wolves didn't purr, but the vibration coming from his chest, a low, constant hum that she felt through her fingertips where they rested against his skin, was the closest thing to purring she had ever encountered. His wolf was calm. For perhaps the first time in 7 years, if what he had told her was true, his wolf was still. Because she was touching him. She finished the suture, tied it off, cut the thread. Did not move her hand. They stayed like that in the bright kitchen, with the medical supplies spread across the counter, and Margaret's footsteps retreating diplomatically down the hallway for a long time. His wolf hummed against her palm, and her wolf pressed against her ribs, and the space between them wasn't empty and not pressurized. It was just warm. "What happened at the border?" she said. "Thane sent a scouting party, 12 wolves. They are testing response times. He paused. They are also looking for something. Someone. One of them mentioned a wolf, an anomaly. Female. Listed as wolfless in the Greymoor records, but flagged by Thane's intelligence network as a potential apex. The warmth drained from her body. Cale's hand came up and covered hers where it rested on his side. "He knows about you," Kyle said. "I do not know how, but he knows what you are and he is looking for you. An unbonded apex female is the rarest asset in wolf politics. With you, Thane could challenge any pack on the continent." She tried to pull her hand away. His grip tightened. Not painfully, firmly. "I will not let him touch you," he said. "Do you understand? No one will touch you. No one will take you. No one will make you bury any part of yourself in the ground ever again." She looked at him, at the blood and the stitches, and the amber eyes, and the scar that branched across his cheekbone, and she felt something break inside her that she had not known was still intact. The last wall, the one she had built not around her wolf, but around herself, the human part, the part that remembered what it was like to be held, and also remembered what happened when the holding stopped. "I am afraid," she said. "I know. Not of Thane, of this. Of you. Of what happens when I stop hiding." He brought her hand up from his side and pressed his mouth against her knuckles. Not a kiss. Something more deliberate than that. A contact, a point of connection, his lips against the bandages on her torn fingertips. "Then be afraid," he said against her skin. "I will be here while you are afraid." She did not go back to the east room that night. She sat in the kitchen with him until dawn, not touching, except where their shoulders met, and they talked, not about the mate bond or the war or the apex classification, about things. Small things. He told her that his father had built the library and his mother had organized it, and when she died, the system died with her. And no one had been able to replicate it since. She told him about the thermos with the chipped lid held together with electrical tape, and how she had left it on her desk at the compound, and was more upset about that than she was about leaving anything else. He told her that Margaret had once chased a visiting dignitary out of the kitchen with a wooden spoon because he had criticized the soup. She told him that the records room at the compound had a window that faced east, and every morning the light came through it at an angle that made the dust motes look like gold, and some mornings that window was the only beautiful thing in her entire day. At dawn, Margaret came in and made coffee, and did not comment on finding them still in the kitchen. She set 2 mugs on the counter, and looked at the stitches in Cale's side, and said, "Not bad," in a tone that from Margaret was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The next 2 weeks were different. The distance collapsed. Not all at once. Not in the dramatic sweeping way of stories where a single kiss unlocks everything. In pieces. In the way Cale started appearing in the library while she worked, sitting in the armchair by the window, reading reports, not speaking, just present. In the way she started coming to dinner without locking her door first. In the way she touched his arm one evening while making a point about the 1887 classification reforms, and neither of them acknowledged it, and both of them felt it. In the way her wolf slowly began to wake up. Not the violent, desperate awakening of the field. Something gradual and organic like spring in a place that has been winter for a very long time. She felt it in increments, a heightened sense of smell that made Margaret's cooking almost overwhelming, an increase in night vision that turned the East Room's darkness into a landscape of subtle greys and blues, a warmth in her chest that was not the mate bond, or not only the mate bond, but her own wolf's body temperature rising from the hibernation of 9 years. On the morning of the 6th week, she woke up and her fangs were descending. Not the old ones buried in silver soil back at the compound. New ones. Serafina lay in bed and pressed her tongue against the points of pressure in her upper jaw and felt the tips razor-sharp breaking through the gum. Her wolf purred. She went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Her canines were extending millimeter by millimeter, and her eyes, which had been brown her entire life, had a ring of gold around the iris that had not been there the night before. The door was locked. She stood in the bathroom and reached for the pliers that were not there, reached for the instinct that had governed her for 9 years, the instinct that said, pull them out, bury them, hide. Her hand was shaking. She did not pull them. She went downstairs with her fangs still descending, walked into the dining room, where Kyle was reading a report and drinking black coffee, and she opened her mouth and showed him. The report hit the table. His coffee cup rattled. He was on his feet, and in front of her, in a movement so fast, it was not a movement. It was a displacement, one moment there, and the next moment here. His hands on either side of her face, his thumbs against her jaw, tilting her head back so the morning light caught the tips of her new fangs. The sound his wolf made travelled through his hands and into her jaw and down her spine, and her wolf answered it, loud and joyful and completely without restraint, and Serafina laughed. She laughed, standing in the dining room with her head tilted back and an alpha king holding her face like it was made of glass, and her fangs coming in for the first time without violence or pliers or blood. "Do not pull them," he said. His voice was rough. "I was not going to." He looked at her. The amber of his eyes was molten. Good. The crisis, when it came fast. Thane attacked on a Thursday. Not at the border. At the estate. A coordinated assault, 30 wolves, hitting the eastern perimeter at 4 in the morning, while a second force circled to the north and came through the tree line. The alarm system, which was sophisticated and redundant, and had never been breached, was breached. Thane had someone inside the pack, someone who knew the codes, and the first Serafina knew of the attack was Margaret bursting into the east room and saying, "Get dressed now, basement," and the sound of wolves howling in the tree line. She dressed. She did not go to the basement. She went to the front steps where Kyle was already shifted, and what she saw stopped her in the doorway. His wolf form was everything the rumors said, and more. Black-furred, massive, easily 8 feet at the shoulder with amber eyes that blazed like signal fires. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, flanked by a dozen of his wolves, facing the tree line, where shadows moved in patterns that were not wind. Thane emerged first. He was smaller than Kale in wolf form, grey-furred, lean, built for speed. Behind him, his wolves fanned out in a semicircle, and Serafina counted them. 23, 24, 25, more than Kale had on the ground. The second force had drawn away half the estate's defenders. Then Thane shifted. He stood in the clearing in human form, a calculated show of confidence, and he was not what she expected. He was not large. He was average height, narrow-shouldered, with a face that was unremarkable except for his eyes, which were pale grey and utterly disconcertingly calm. He wore a canvas jacket that looked like something you would buy at a hardware store. He looked like someone's accountant. "Kyle," he said. His voice carried the same way Kyle's did, but where Kyle's voice was weight, Thane's was precision. "I am not here for you." Kale's growl shook the ground, literally. Serafina felt the floorboards vibrate under her feet. "Give me the apex," Thane said. "I know she is here. My source confirmed it 2 days ago. Give her to me and I will withdraw. This does not need to be a war. A source inside the pack. Seraphina felt cold slide through her veins. Someone had told Thane about her. Someone close enough to know she was here, what she was, what she meant. I will even let you keep the territory, Thane continued. He smiled. It was a small, reasonable smile, the smile of a man proposing a business arrangement. I am not unreasonable. An apex female is worth more than land. You know that. I know that. She probably knows that. Give her to me, and everyone lives. Kyle shifted. The transformation was not the slow, cinematic process that Seraphina had read about in files. It was instantaneous. 1 second a wolf, the next second a man. He stood in the clearing, barefoot, bare-chested, the stitches from her needlework, visible on his side, and his face was the thing that made Thane's wolves take a collective step backward. It was not anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. This was the expression of a man who has calculated the exact trajectory of violence required, and found it not only acceptable but satisfying. She is my mate, Cale said. She is the Luna of the Blood Crown pack. She is mine. Thane's calm did not waver. He looked past Cale at the front steps of the lodge, and his pale grey eyes found Seraphina standing in the doorway in borrowed clothes, with her new fangs pressing against her lower lip. Is she? Thane said. Or is she a frightened girl who pulled her own teeth out to stop being what she is? My source was thorough, Kyle. I know everything. I know she spent 9 years in a containment facility. I know she buried her own fangs in silver soil. I know she is an apex who has never shifted, never fought, never used a single capability of what she is. She is not your Luna. She is a weapon you haven't figured out how to fire. The worst part was that he was not wrong. Not about the facts. Not about any of it except the conclusion, and even the conclusion was close enough to the truth that it made Seraphina's stomach turn. Kyle did not respond. He looked at Seraphina. Not for permission. Not for reassurance. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the field, with that patient, impossible certainty, and his eyes said the same thing they had said then. You are mine. But there was something else now. Something that had not been there in the field. A question. Not spoken, not demanded. Just present in the space between them, offered without pressure. What do you want? She stood in the doorway and felt the cold air on her skin and the vibration of 30 hostile wolves through the soles of her feet and her mate's gaze on her face, and her own wolf fully awake, fully present, pressing against her ribs, not with desperation, but with readiness. 9 years. 9 years of hiding. 9 years of pulling her own teeth, of starving her wolf, of being quiet and small and invisible, of reaching for files on the high shelf and otherwise going unnoticed. She stepped off the porch. The shift came. It was not like anything she had read in the files. It was not painful. It was not slow. It was like remembering. Like finally, after years of holding your breath, exhaling. Her body did not fight it. Her bones did not crack and reform. They simply became what they had always been, underneath the human shape, the way water becomes ice, the same substance in a different form. She was white. Not grey, not silver, not the pale cream that some rare wolves displayed. White, pure luminescent white, the colour of moonlight on snow, the colour of the inside of a seashell, the colour that doesn't occur in nature except when nature is making a point. She was smaller than Kyle, but not small. Her eyes in wolf form were gold, the same burning gold that Margaret had seen in the kitchen, and they were fixed on Thane with an expression that made the Alpha's calm crack for the first time. Thane took a step back. It was involuntary. She could see that. His body moved before his mind could countermand it, an instinctive response to a stimulus his wolf recognized, even if his rational brain did not. An apex in full form, a wolf that should not exist, standing in a clearing with her fangs bared and her gold eyes burning and every molecule of the air rearranging itself around her presence. She did not attack. She walked, slowly, across the clearing between Kyle's wolves and Thane's wolves, her white fur catching the pre-dawn light, and she stopped 10 feet from Thane. The same distance Kyle had kept from her in the field. She understood now why he had chosen it. It was close enough to be unmistakable, far enough to be a choice. Thane looked at her. His calm had reassembled itself mostly, but the cracks were visible. His wolves behind him were restless, shifting weight ears flat. And then Thane did something she did not expect. He sighed. It was not a dramatic gesture, not a villain's monologue or a defeated general's last stand. It was the sigh of a tired man who has wagered on an outcome and seen the odds change. He looked at Seraphina in her apex form and at Kyle standing behind her, and his face, for just a moment, was not calculating or calm. It was sad. My brother, he said quietly, would have been 43 this year. He had a daughter. She asks about him. I tell her he was brave, which is what you tell children. I do not tell her that brave and dead are synonyms in our world. Seraphina's wolf watched him. She could smell the grief on him, mineral and sharp like the inside of a stone. I will withdraw, Thane said. Not because of your mate's wolf, Kale. Not because I am afraid. Because I have spent 2 years chasing a war that will not bring my brother back, and I am tired of the chase. Your apex is yours. Keep her. He shifted. His wolves shifted. They disappeared into the tree line like grey water, draining into dark earth, and the clearing was silent. Kyle shifted back to human. Seraphina did not. She stood in the clearing in her wolf form, white and burning and finally whole, and she didn't want to go back to human shape yet. She wanted to stand here, in this body that she had denied for 9 years, and feel it. The cold air in her fur, the frozen ground under her paws, the vast singing awareness of every living thing in a mile, radius the deer in the forest, the owls in the canopy, the 40 wolves behind her, who had just watched her walk into a standoff, and end it without blood. Kyle walked to her. He knelt in the frozen grass, as he had knelt in the frozen mud of the compound field, and he put his hand on her head between her ears. And the contact was electric, and warm, and everything. Welcome back, he said. She pressed her nose against his palm. The pack gathered 3 days later. Not because Kale ordered it, because Margaret told them to. The clearing in front of the lodge had been cleared of debris from the incursion. Torches lined the perimeter, their flames making the tree line dance. 400 wolves stood in a loose semicircle in human form and wolf form watching. Margaret stood at the edge of the crowd with a mug of tea and the expression of someone supervising a wedding she had planned herself. The source of Thane's intelligence had been found, a beta named Harlan, who worked in the estate's communications office. He was standing at the far edge of the clearing, flanked by 2 guards, and his face was the color of old ash. Kale had not spoken to him, had not needed to. The pack knew. That was enough. Seraphina stood in the center of the clearing beside Kyle. She was wearing a dress Margaret had produced from somewhere dark blue, simple warm. Her fangs were fully descended, now visible when she spoke, and she did not hide them. Kyle turned to her. The torchlight made his scar look like a river of gold. He did not ask. She had already told him. In the kitchen the night before, sitting in the same chairs where she had stitched his wound, she had said yes. Not dramatically. Not after a speech. She had been stirring honey into her tea, and she had said yes. I am ready. And he had looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he had carried in his bones for 7 years. The marking was not what she expected. She had imagined something ceremonial, formal, a ritual with words and witnesses and procedure. Instead, Kyle simply leaned forward, slowly giving her time to pull away, and pressed his mouth against the junction of her neck and shoulder. His fangs descended. She felt them against her skin, 2 points of pressure, and then a sting that was sharp and brief and gave way to a warmth that spread from the bite outward through her entire body, flooding her veins, dissolving something in her chest that she hadn't known was still clenched. Her wolf howled, not silently, not internally, aloud in her human throat, a sound that was neither fully human nor fully wolf, but something between, and the clearing echoed with it, and the 400 wolves gathered in the torchlight answered. The sound was enormous. It shook the trees. It scattered the birds. It rolled across the mountain and came back as an echo that sounded impossibly like her mother's voice. She bit him back. She had not planned to. The instinct rose up from somewhere primal and irrefutable, and she turned her head and sank her new fangs into the muscle of his shoulder and tasted his blood, copper, and cedar, and the electric charge of an alpha's bond snapping into place, and his wolf roared through his chest so powerfully that she felt it in her teeth. When she pulled back, the mark on his shoulder was already scarring. Silver white. The color of her wolf's fur. He looked at it, then at her. I was going to say something, he said. I had words prepared. Margaret told you not to, she said. Margaret told me not to, he confirmed. The crowd was pressing closer, wolves murmuring, some in human form, touching their own necks where the bond marks sat, remembering their own moments. Serafina looked out at them and felt something she hadn't felt in 9 years, which was not belonging exactly, and not safety, though it was close. It was visibility, the experience of being seen, all of her, the records clerk and the apex wolf, and the woman who had pulled her own teeth in a bathroom at 3 a.m, and not one of those versions being rejected. Harlan, the traitor beta, was led forward. He did not look at Cal. He looked at Serafina, and his expression was complicated. Fear, yes. Guilt, yes. But also something she recognized because she had worn it herself. Exhaustion. The particular kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a secret too heavy for your frame. He was in debt, Margaret had told her. Thane offered to clear it. He has 3 children. He did not do it for ideology. He did it for grocery money. Kyle's jaw was set. The pack expected an execution. Border law was clear. Serafina touched his arm. He looked at her. Exile, she said. Not execution. His children did nothing wrong. The clearing was silent. 400 wolves watching the Alpha King's mate contradict the Alpha King's law in front of the entire pack. Kyle looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Harlan. Exile, he said. Take your family. Cross the southern border by dawn. If I see you again, the decision will be different. Harlan's knees buckled. One of the guards caught him. He did not speak. He could not, but he looked at Serafina, and the look was a debt that would never be spoken aloud, but would be carried quietly for the rest of his life. The pack did not disperse. They watched. They saw their Alpha King defer to his mate, not from weakness, but from the specific kind of strength that recognizes another perspective as worthy. And something shifted in the air, a collective recalibration, 400 wolves adjusting their understanding of who Seraphina was. Margaret at the edge of the clearing sipped her tea. Later. Much later. After the torches had burned down and the pack had dispersed, and Margaret had gone to bed, and the lodge was quiet, Seraphina stood in the library on the upper level where the genealogy ledgers lived. She had finished the index the week before. The concordance was complete. 300 years of wolf history organized and cross-referenced and accessible for the first time. She pulled the ledger from 1847, the one she had been reading on the day Kyle found her on the floor, surrounded by dust and open books. She turned to the entry about the wolf who had buried extracted teeth in silver-laced earth, the entry she had used as a blueprint for her own defanging. She read it again. And this time, with everything she now knew, she noticed something she had missed before. A margin note in a different hand, added years after the original entry. The ink was faded to near invisibility, a soft brown against the yellowed page, and the handwriting was small and cramped. It read, "Teeth recovered and returned. Patient shifted at 63. First shift in 40 years. Lived to 91. Wolf form was white." Seraphina closed the ledger. She held it against her chest and felt the weight of it, the 3 centuries of names and classifications and anomalies, and the small cramped note in the margin that no one had read in 100 years. A woman who had buried her teeth, a woman who had gotten them back, a woman whose wolf had been white. She heard the staircase creak. Kyle appeared at the end of the row, barefoot in sleep pants, the silver-white scar of her bite mark visible on his shoulder. He looked at her standing there with the ledger pressed against her chest, and he did not ask what she had found. He leaned against the shelf and waited. She set the ledger back in its place. She crossed the space between them, reached up and pressed her palm flat against the scar she had left on his shoulder. His wolf hummed under her hand. The library was quiet. The lodge was quiet. Outside, the mountain was dark against a sky thick with stars, and somewhere in a frozen field behind a containment compound, 2 old fangs lay in silver soil where they would stay forever. Relics of a woman who no longer existed. Seraphina curled her fingers into the warmth of his skin, felt his heartbeat steady and strong against her palm, and her wolf settled into her bones like it had always been there, like it had never left.